Sustainable Leadership Live. I'm Lisa Danforth, your host, and today I have the marvelous Mary-Theresa Tringale. Mary-Theresa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I know. I can't wait to talk about that book that's right behind you a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But before we jump in, I do want to just share a little bit about Mary-Theresa, why we have her here, and she's sharing her brilliance with us today. Mary-Theresa, or Mary MT for short, is a certified life success coach and practitioner of NLP, EFT tapping, and hypnotherapy. She's a TEDx speaker and a best-selling author, and she loves nothing more than cheering others on. After her own radical transformation in 2019, MT launched her coaching program with her coaching business with her signature program, the Aligned and Empowered Project. To coach others through breakthroughs, to find what success looks like on the inside and out. So very important. And today we're talking about building awareness around the stories that we carry that don't belong to us, right? Mm-hmm. Time to set those down. So MT, thank you so much for joining. I am super excited about this. I say, let's jump right in and start moving along with this.
Mm-hmm.
I was just watching your TED Talk, by the way. If you haven't seen it, people will post the link in the chat. And I love what you're talking about, those stories and how you really came about to learning about this. Can you share a little bit about that?
It's so funny that you asked me that, because I literally was thinking the other day, when did I first realize that I was carrying these stories that were like making such an impact on my life? And it actually started a few years ago when I was talking with a friend who's a therapist and coach. And she was the first one to tell me to look at the stories that I carry around money. And I was like, what are you talking about? She said, well, you have money in other places. It's not just in your bank account. And I was like, what are you talking about? That is only money I have access to. And then when she was challenging me to look at the other places that money not only was available to me, but other ways, like if I sold something that I had, that's money. So like this mouse that I'm holding, this is money. It's just in the form of a mouse. So I started looking at the stories and agreements that I carry around money. And that just started to open up my whole perspective of it's not just money, it's life in general. And I started to see the different ways that impact the stories that my parents have carried down through generations has impacted me, the stories that society has brought towards me. And when I really started fighting those stories that have been passed down, not only from the generations the stories that we carry in our bodies, but those trying to be forced upon us from society and community. When I was in elementary school, I really wanted to go to this vocational high school that was actually down the street from me. And it was a non-traditional way of doing high school, where it's career and tech ed. So 1 week you'd be in academics and 1 week you'd be in your shop. So that could be culinary arts, it could be graphic design, it could be automotive. And I really wanted to go to that school. But even in elementary school, my classmates were coming to me and being like, you want to go to that school? My parents tell me that that's only for the kids who don't want to go to college, and that's only for the kids who are troublemakers, and that's only for the kids who don't want to make anything of their lives. And then as I grew up, I was hearing it from my teachers, from people in the community. And I just remember I was always fighting against that story that other people were trying to tell me. But as I've grown up and I've done the work in NLP and mindset, learning about mindset, fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and following all of these mentors who have written incredible books, I've just learned so much about how they're deep within our subconscious mind, and we don't even know that we're carrying them. And that is just so fascinating to me. And I've learned how to ask really deep, important questions to my clients to get them to reveal what those stories are, so they can start deciding, does this story belong to me, or is it something that I get to decide different on? And I'm doing that in my life every single day. And I still work on those stories myself. And I think that's so important as a coach, to still be doing the work on yourself so that you can support your clients. So that's a very long answer. When I realized what stories, it was probably a few years ago when I started thinking about my stories around money, but I've been fighting those stories or doing it different since I was a little kid.
Because we're just simply not aware. It's really, you make me think, I talk about it through a lens, right? We look through a lens that we don't even understand, we're not clear on. We can take that lens off and look through a different lens, a different perspective. But we have from such a young age been sort of that receiver, that radio tower receiving all of these different messages that we've quieted our voices, quieted our boundaries. So how did you start understanding that it was a lens and it's a story? Like, can you share a little bit about that? Because again, if we haven't done the work, how do we even understand that it's not our story? It's not what we want to be looking at.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say that, well, first of all, my real awakening journey began back in 2019 when I was going through a really, really difficult time in my life. And I heard from different mentors that in order to change your life, you have to take radical responsibility for where you're at. And these stories about, or these, the not stories, but inspirational thought leaders were saying, you've created your entire life. So if you don't like what you see on the outside, it's a byproduct of what you're doing, what's happening on the inside. And I didn't really understand that myself until I went through my own transformational journey, which was my medicine was the 75 Hard program. That's what helped me get out of my own way. And through that program, I started reading, and I was reading so many different books. It started, my first book was Think and Grow Rich. And that's the book, like that's the original book that's like, you can do anything. And if you believe it, you can achieve it. And so that's really where the seed was starting to be planted. And through all of these books that I started reading, it just became so abundantly clear that there was so much happening on the inside that was influencing the outside. And as I started to just take note of that stuff, I started to see changes. And then the more I took note, the more changed on the outside. And so now it's been this longer journey of, I like to call it like our mindset game is like an onion. You peel off that top layer and you're like, holy moly, my whole life has changed. But then you get to the next layer. Right. Yes. Oh my gosh. But then you get to that next layer and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I already dealt with this. You didn't. It's just new levels, new devils. So as you grow and evolve, you just start to see how these stories that you've carried your whole life, and not only your whole life, but generations before you, they're still within your body. And it's not about like getting rid of the stories. It's about acknowledging them and seeing them and saying, I'm going to try it different anyway. Let's just see how it goes. So I think it was this program that I started doing. That's a really challenging program, but it meant that I had to put up boundaries. I had to clearly communicate. I needed to be disciplined. I needed to decide that nothing else in the world mattered before me taking care of myself. And when that happened, I just was open. And when I did that, I was in such a desperate place in my life that I was like, I am just here to do this thing, and I'm open to whatever comes my way. And what came my way was this incredible awareness and awakening of how I have a whole hell of a lot more control over my life than I thought I did. Yeah. And then when you have that awareness, you're like, oh, okay. So it's empowering and like, oh, shoot. But there's no time. It's never too late to take ownership of that so that you can move forward with your life. So that's really where it began. But the books were really such a huge part. And I had coaching at the time. I was going through a coaching program. So I was reading all these books. I was having all these aha moments. And then I had a coach who was there to like support me as I was, and a community that was there to be like, okay, what you're experiencing right now, this is what that is. Like, talk about it. How do you feel about it? And having that coach to kind of be this mirror back to me as I was having this, like, what is happening in my world? It's so wonderful and so great and so hard all at the same time. It was quite the journey for sure.
It is. It's exciting and hard. And if you want, you check out the book right behind MT as well. But she talks about that journey through is it 75 Hard? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
75 hard. And I mean, when I did it, it was very new. It had just come out, and it was just this guy who started changing his life. And he was a owner of a multi-million dollar company, and people started recognizing him for, not just looking good physically, but this glow, that's what a lot of people said to me.
Yeah.
You're just glowing. And
Mhm.
and people said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. And he just kind of put it into there's no scientific evidence when he created it. He just was like, this is what I'm doing, and it's changing my life. And he put it out there to the people who follow him, who look up to him, and people just started doing it. And I think, changed a lot of people's perspective in life. And it's a tool. It's a different tool. A lot of people who are in the fitness industry don't love it, and that's okay. I'm not here
That's
to debate
interesting.
it. But yeah, it definitely changed my life. It's not a program that when people come and work with me, I don't have that. They're not coming to me to work through the 75 hard program. We do other habits, but it's definitely something that changed my life when I needed it, for sure.
It's amazing what curiosity, being open and curious
Yeah.
and letting go of judgment, just setting it down even for a moment, how it can truly shift our perspective.
Yes.
I'd like to back up just a little bit and talk about the radical responsibility,
Mm.
right? I keep thinking of radical acceptance, radical responsibility. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
talk about this in your TEDx talk, and you go through like the awareness, the choice. Can you just share about
Mm-hmm.
that, because that's so impactful, succinct and impactful.
Yeah, I mean, in NLP, we talk about this. The true formula for empowerment is living in cause over effect. And living in cause means that everything that happens in our life, there is an opportunity or a lesson to be learned. Even the really hard, horrible stuff, there is always an opportunity and a lesson to be learned. When we're living in effect, that means that we are living in a space of life is happening to me, nothing is fair, all of these people hate, like, just horrible people all around me. And you're just, when you live in effect, it's like you're living with blinders on, and you refuse to take them down because you don't want to see that it's not just this way. And I think that I mean, at least was brought up to be in that victim mindset a lot, not just from my parents, but like my father was 100% Italian. That was the way they were brought up. It was just like, poor me, nothing is fair. And I think that when you take radical responsibility, and what I mean for that is that it's just, you're owning things that you were brought up to believe are not your fault. You're brought up to, but society tells you it's not your fault. But you just kind of own the moment, and you own your life and say, okay, this is a really, really hard time right now, but I'm willing to see that there might be a lesson here for me. I'm willing to see that there's an opportunity. I'm willing to see that there's something here that I can take control of. There are a lot of things in our life that you cannot control. There are also a lot of things about how you can control your life. A great example of this is, I had a client call the other day, and she was talking about, she had a birthday, and she was talking about how it wasn't that great, and how she went out to dinner with this person that she didn't really want to go out with. And when she said, this is what I want to do, the other person said, no, we're going to do this. And we had to have the conversation, which is a hard conversation, to say, you were in choice that entire time. You chose to still go out with that person. You chose to do what they wanted to do. You chose that. You chose X, Y, and Z. And even on my journey that I've been here, I still am making those choices. And then I'm annoyed that I made those choices,
Every
right?
day.
So this is just, it's not that you get to a point that you're like, yes, everything, life is always happening for me. It's like, it's hard sometimes, especially when you've spent way more years of your life not living in that space than you are living in that space. And sometimes you just need to keep being reminded to come back to this place of like, own where you're at, own that you made that choice, own that you made that decision. And now what are you going to do? So where is the opportunity? Where is the lesson? And that's where I say it's radical responsibility, because you're being radical about it. You're owning it so hard and so strongly that it kind of puts other people if they were to watch you, almost make them uncomfortable, or it makes you uncomfortable to take
Mhm.
ownership of that. But when you take responsibility for your life, that is when you can make the shift. When you start controlling the things that you can control, life
Mhm.
starts to shift for you. So that's when we go back to 75 Hard. The 75 Hard program was basically all the things I could control in my life at that time. And I could go for a walk twice a day. I could read a book for 10 pages. I could just watch my diet and track it. I could not drink alcohol. I could drink a water of gallon. Those were all things that I could absolutely control. Did I have the willpower to control them the whole time? Well, that's where the discipline comes in. That's where the boundaries come in. That's where having a support system comes
Mhm.
in. But those things were the things I could control. And that's all I focused on. I focused on that. I focused on my work. And then I just kind of let life happen all around me because there was so much out of my control at that time. So when you take radical responsibility to own the moments of your life that you can control, which includes seeing the really hard stuff as an opportunity, seeing the really hard stuff as what is the lesson here? And the action that you can take that's in your control could be just writing it down. Like, here's the thing that's really hard that's happening in my life right now. Here are places where I might see that might be an opportunity
Mhm.
someday, right?
Some
So,
I think
yeah,
we do love to keep the blinders on
of
because it's
course.
much easier to blame others and be the victim than to actually take radical responsibility.
Yeah.
And, radical responsibility can sound so harsh, but I think when we take radical responsibility, at least for me, and I'd love your input on this, it
Mm,
actually comes with a great deal of compassionate curiosity that allows
mm.
us to step forward, looking through a different perspective and changing our behavior.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way, and I would say empowerment, like, it's just feels like, "Oh, I have a whole lot more control here." Like,
Stand
"Oh,
in your
okay."
power.
Right, and so one of the things that I love, and I did say this, I think I said this in my TED Talk, I kinda blacked out while I was talking on that stage, so I hope I said this, but it's about, like, that idea of curious, getting curious. I
Mhm.
remember, that's not exactly something that you're brought up to be, asking a lot of questions, right?
We're taught
So
not to be
that's
curious, not
right.
to question, not to
That's
have
right.
boundaries.
That's right. I mean, I think about parents who are like, "Oh God, they're at the age that they just ask why," and I mean, you're encouraged to just let it be and not keep asking why. And I think that's one thing that I was brought up to challenge. And I'm specifically remembering my English class. We were reading Shakespeare, and my teacher was working with, and I loved him. He was so great, and he loved that I was somebody who got curious because he was reading the part of one of the I don't even remember who, as this way, and I was interpreting the words completely
Oh,
different. And I rose my hand, and I raised my hand, and I was like, I actually think he meant it this way. And he was like, what? And it became this battle the entire time that we were working on the book. And he would literally do his part, and he'd say, okay, Tringale, what do you think that part was? And it became this joke that I was challenging the status quo. And I think that, from a very young age, that was one thing my parents always allowed of me, was just to kind of be different than everybody else. I mean, starting with the idea of going to the vocational high school, but I don't know that I ever saw it as I'm being curious. I'm being curious
mm,
and asking questions. So I love the idea of encouraging people to let themselves be curious about the words that you tell yourself. Be curious about the stories you're telling yourself. Where do they come from? Do they belong to you? Why do you believe that way? Is it just because you think there's no other option? What if I was to tell you there is? So I love the idea of curiosity as a whole. I remember I did one of those personality tests in high school, and I always assign somebody said, "Oh, well, when you're the green, you're curious," and I was like, "I don't even know what that means." They're like, "You're interested in, like, I don't know how a computer works, or how does a car work,"
mhm.
and I was never interested in that stuff. But when I started leaning into this work of, like, how we create our reality, it was just like, oh, that's so,
Right? Expansive.
it's not curious about the inner workings of our brain, but it's more so curious about, like, the process and what's happening and why do we do this to ourselves. So I just love that. But
let's talk about the process, because in the green room we were talking about, what is it? 95% of our thoughts are unconscious.
Yeah.
We don't even understand that it's a story. Can you share a little bit about that, just so that we have the awareness that, oh, wow.
What is that? Yeah. So yeah, this was actually, so you won't find that in my book, because I wrote my book before I went through my neuro-linguistic programming training. So this is neuro-linguistic programming, which is the way in which our unconscious, subconscious mind communicates. And the most important thing why it's so important to do this NLP work, or why I was so curious about NLP, was because this idea that there's 95% of our thoughts, which neuroscientists are still working on these details. Your brain is so complex. And so the theory is that 95% of the thoughts you think every day, you're unconscious of. So if you think about it, your heart is constantly beating. That is an unconscious thought system that your brain is communicating with your body. Same for all your organs, them working. It's an unconscious thing, right? So, but there's other things that you do, habits that you do every single day that you're doing unconsciously. And the best description that I have, that I did explain in my TED Talk, is when you're driving along and you're either daydreaming, listening to a podcast, talking to a friend, and you just all of a sudden you're driving along and you end up in your driveway and you don't even know how you got there. Your subconscious mind got you there, right?
Frightening sometimes.
Right. And I mean, as soon as you bring things to the consciousness, you're like, oh, here I am. I don't even remember taking that turn, but I must have. But you're making over 35,000 decisions a day, 35,000 decisions. So I'm deciding I'm going to pick up my water. I'm deciding how the words that I'm going to say to you. I'm deciding that I'm going to go for a walk. I'm deciding, it's not just big decisions, but just, deciding I'm going to scratch my ear when it's itchy. We're making small decisions and really big decisions all day long. If you think about 95% of those decisions are unconscious, that means over 32,500 decisions every day we are unaware of. And those decisions are being dictated by our subconscious mind, and they are the decisions that make us take action or don't take action, right? And so if you don't like what you see on the outside, it's because of what's happening deep within. And so when we think about our subconscious mind, we are carrying all of these stories and agreements that have been passed down to us, whether that's from society, from the news, from our parents, or from generational stories and agreements. Then that's where we have to start working with building awareness to understand what those stories are. Now, once we have the awareness around what the stories are, we get to decide, is this for me or is it not? Am I going to do it different, or am I going to lean in? The TED Talk title is the stories of your ancestors should be ignored. And I know that it was meant to be controversial. It was meant to make people go, what? Because I certainly think that the wisdom of our ancestors can also be acknowledged and accepted and taken on. But there are certainly things that my ancestors on both sides of my family lived into that I want no part of. And partly it's because that wisdom does not align. Wait, did I say that the talk is the wisdom of our ancestors should be ignored, not taken on? So there's wisdom on that side that I'm like, okay, that is wisdom for that generation, and that was how they survived. And that just doesn't belong to me, whether it's because the values don't align with me or because I just believe I can have something different. And so, but there's certainly things that we can carry on from our ancestors before us as fulfilling their desires that they weren't able to fulfill because of the stories that they carried at the time. So that was such a long answer. Did I answer your question? I think so.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Okay.
It's such a high percentage that I think just having awareness of that helps us be curious, helps us start to question the stories, question all of it, question whether we want to do the 75 hard or not. Whatever it may be.
Well,
But
and like, why would you think that you couldn't do it? Right.
And that right there is it just such a pivotal question. Why?
Yeah.
My belief is all behavior is belief driven.
Yeah.
So in those habits, we are what we repeatedly do. So starting to question, what are those habits, and what was the belief that had me activated the trigger that had me choosing what is not serving me.
Yeah. Yep. And so that's the mindset framework, right? So the mindset framework states that our programming, which is those beliefs and agreements that we carry down that we aren't even aware of, that might have been pushed upon us and just given to us, and we were like, okay, this is the way life is. Then programming indicates our thoughts create our emotions create our actions, and our actions create our results. So if you don't like your results, you got to take a look at that programming. Right. So, but if you can change your programming, you can change your results. So that's why you have to build the awareness around the programming, which isn't always easy. And I have a lot of clients who are very open to the process, and a lot of clients who are very resistant to the process. And that's okay, because it's hard to basically admit that you've been wrong for a lot of things that you've decided in your life, or that you have to, again, take responsibility for creating the thing that you're now annoyed that is part of your world. So
I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying with the wrong, but it is that we're not even aware that we're making a choice.
Yeah.
Right? So just having the understanding that we can start to shift that, which is huge. So I can't believe we are actually a little bit over time. It just, everything that you're sharing is just so very important. And I'd love to go through a couple more things, but what I would love to know is there something a question that I didn't ask you that you just think is really important to share with the audience?
I think that, yes. And this is where I'll say, please go watch my TED Talk, because what I want you to understand is that the process of learning to connect with your subconscious mind can be challenging. And you don't even know where you're not listening to your truth and you're just listening to the ego. And I have a lot of times when I ask the deep questions to my clients, they answer me with the way they think they should be responding. I don't want to feel this way, but blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I know you don't want to say, I'm really scared about this thing that I'm about to do. I get it. But if you don't address the fear, if you don't allow yourself to even acknowledge that there is some kind of fear there, what you resist persists. And it's just kind of like, it's just going to stay there forever. And so if you don't acknowledge the real thoughts that are happening deep within, which this is where having a coach or a support system is super helpful, because they can see you when you can't see yourself. When we're too close to it, it is really hard to see our own BS. So it's easier or sometimes I find it easier to have somebody be reflecting back to me, either what I'm not saying but actually mean, or when I'm playing small. And I think playing small is when you don't acknowledge that there's a difference between the ego, the fear-based the beliefs, and what is your real truth, right? So the ego is always going to try and keep you safe. And sometimes that is like, well, I don't want to be seen as a victim, so I'm going to say this. But the thing is, your subconscious mind is actually living in that victim space because that's what you've been taught your whole life. So how do we address it? How do we build awareness around it? How do we let that breathe so that you can move on and move through? But if you don't address it, then it will always be living within, and you'll never be able to move through it. So
compassionate curiosity with graceful accountability, right? Don't beat yourself up. Don't let yourself off the hook. I think that's so incredibly important.
Yeah, I love that.
So what one thing would you like people to take away from our conversation today?
I think that the one thing is that you don't have to do it the way that everybody says. Yeah. You don't have to. If somebody asks you, why do you believe that? And your answer is because that's just the way it is.
Stop.
That is your red flag. That is your moment to pause. That is, get out your journal, write it down, and sit with it and write out all the reasons why. My computer just froze. That's all. Okay. I wasn't touching my computer. It went into screensaver mode. So just make sure that you are allowing yourself to like really get curious about why you do the things you do. And if at any point the other red flag is, because of this, this is now happening to me because they did this, blah, blah, blah. You are in victim mode when you're in that place of life is happening to me, life is unfair, why is this happening? Da, da, da. Because if you can believe that life is always happening for you, that is a way more empowering place to come from. And it's also, if you start to believe in the law of attraction and, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to say it right. So I'm not even going to say it, but it's just, if you can believe that like energy, we are all energy and like attracts like. Yeah. And that that things are not just the way they appear, that you can attract the things you want into your life, then, if you can make that shift, just be aware of those moments when you are going into that victim mode so that you can step back and start leaning into, okay, well, what do I have control over here? Yeah.
Beautiful. That is so incredibly powerful. It literally will change your life when you start to do that.
Absolutely.
So, MT, where can people find you, reach out to you, all of that?
The best place to connect are on the social medias. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'll be in there much more often. I don't spend enough time there, but I'm going to lean in a little bit more. The opportunities are there for me. And, but that's the best places to connect with me. Send me a DM, say hello. I will admit that my website is not exactly the best place for you to find anything out about me, but check out my TED Talk, grab my book, if TEDx Talk, grab my book. And that's the best places to get to know me, I would say. But I do try and do some different tapping sessions on Instagram for free so people can join along and hopefully be able to take advantage of that. But I'm trying to always share content that helps move the needle in your life in some way, for sure.
Yeah, you share some amazing content. What is your handle on Instagram, just so people can find you?
At Mary.Theresa.Tringale, and it's Teresa TH. So yeah, it's my whole entire name. I'm very lucky that I have a very unique name, so not a lot of people have it. So it's Mary.Theresa.Tringale. Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next week, April 19th. Crazy, 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 right? I have Christine Badalamenti-Smith talking. She's coming to talk about embodiment and how to embody balance, how to receive, and so that you can keep your well full. It's not all about giving. So being able to receive. So please join me next week, April 19th, with Christine Badalamenti-Smith. And thank you so much for joining us today.